When you look at planets, if they're inhabitable, what's the sign that they are inhabitable? That they're signs of water. Yeah. And the majority of our planet is made up of water. I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way.
We are all fueled by the same thing. We all come from the same thing. It's the most vital resource in existence. Water, the most basic source of life. Everything on this planet relies on water, from plants to rainforests to coral reefs to all human life. Water is vital to our existence. It is often forgotten that for many people, water is something to be fought for. It's difficult for those of us in the US to imagine a world where water isn't easily accessible through a faucet. But there are still battles going on around the world for more access to water. The world is facing a global water crisis that is only getting worse because of climate change. It's becoming harder and harder for many nations to get water. However, while developing and third world countries struggle, first world countries use it in abundance. Water is often overlooked, but there's so much more to the story. Only 1% of the world's water is actually usable by living creatures, and most usable water is underground and not accessible without drilling and excavating. In the countries where water is plentiful, not only do people have running water in their homes to wash dishes or drink, they also have the ability to use water for leisure activities, like going swimming or throwing water balloons. However, there are over 2 billion people who don't even have enough to drink. Not having clean water leads to dehydration and disease, but water isn't only important for drinking. The people of water-scarce nations are unable to practice proper hygiene because of the water. 1 in every 10 people on this planet lacks access to clean water, even in America. To truly understand these issues, we must first look to where human life began, the landlocked African country of Ethiopia. This infamous desert country of Eastern Africa experiences some of the worst water scarcity rates worldwide. There is little rainfall because the nation is in the middle of a desert. The little rainwater that falls is largely used for agriculture, leaving not enough to drink. Geographic issues combined with declining water quality due to pollution, fluorine-infested groundwater, flooding, and drought ripple through this nation, devastating the nearly 120 million people living there. The people of Ethiopia are just too cut off from water. They're forced to travel great distances to be able to get this crucial resource. To gain a broader understanding of these issues, we interviewed Zaki, or Z, the owner of the Cleveland Heights restaurant, Zoma. The restaurant takes the name of a small town near where Zaki grew up. We asked about his experience in Ethiopia.
Yes. Yeah, when I was in your grade, 10th grade, or when I was in high school, sometimes there's no water in our city. So you have to walk like hour and 2 hours with plastic containers and carry that and the water from the rivers, of course here everything is convenient. That's the climate. You see now there's snow in California, but we don't get that much snow here. So right now there is a drought and famine in the northern part of Ethiopia called Borana regions, almost like 25 million people under because there's no rain. So rain means there's no farming, there's no coordination between the government and people.
There aren't any easy long-term solutions for Ethiopia's water crisis. Desalination plants that would remove the salt from ocean water simply cannot be implemented, since there's no way to reach the ocean just beyond the border. Defluorination plants to filter groundwater are far too expensive and require advanced equipment that the impoverished country simply cannot afford. And as Z said, geographical issues are not going to change anytime soon. They may even worsen as time goes on and climate change tears our world apart, stripping the country of any chance it might have had. On top of that, political instability stops the country from truly being able to deal with the issue, as citizens and leaders are far too divided. It may seem easy to ignore since this is just one nation out of hundreds of nations in the world, but Ethiopia is not the only country fighting this war for water access. There are over a dozen countries facing the problem to a similar degree, and sadly, there's less than 10 countries where everyone has safe access to water, and the United States is not among them. However, Greece is. Greece is a country that has recently gained 100% access to water for their people as a result of advancements in technology. They are an example that every nation should strive to follow, so let's dive into Greece. Greece is a nation of beautiful islands in the Aegean Sea. The inhabitants of Greece have 100% access to drinking water. Many of them live a rural and simple life. They have grown to love and cherish their islands and oceans. The blue on the flag of Greece represents the great ocean that surrounds Greece, because of the people's deep connection with the water. To learn about the beauty and importance of the water around us, we spoke to Kathy Koufos. She had lived in Greece when she was a child until her family started to move when she was in her developmental years, but she frequently travels back to Greece to visit her family. We asked Mrs. Koufos how living in Greece as a child and then moving around the world has changed her perspective of the overall issues and factors at work for water accessibility around the world.
I go to my sink, and my son-in-law installed one of those tap faucets. Okay? So, tap the faucet, I get water. Don't even think about it. Don't even have to turn on the little switch. We're spoiled. You know? Water sustains us. Without water, we cannot survive. And there's all sorts of diseases that happen.
Mrs. Koufos speaks on how those who have complete water access can oftentimes be naive of how easy they have it, while other parts of the world struggle for the necessity. But Mrs. Koufos also spoke to us about how her life in Greece has made her hopeful for a world where every nation has the same access to water as Greece. Mrs. Koufos believes that all countries could have complete water access with enough work and care. So, could one day Ethiopia have improved its water access enough to have the same water access as Greece? According to Koufos, yes, they could. But how could Ethiopia have the same water access as Greece if they're so geographically different? Not only is Ethiopia in the desert, but it's landlocked, while Greece is completely surrounded by water. Mrs. Koufos spoke to us about how she has tried to create more potable or drinkable water for underdeveloped nations.
I belong to the Daughters of Penelope, which is an organization in Canton, Ohio. We do a lot of philanthropic work, and one of them is providing special water filters for underdeveloped countries, be it in Africa or any other countries, or even within the US, to make sure people have potable water. Look at this resource of water here. You know what desalination is? Okay. They can have desalination plants where they can take this water that is totally accessible and utilize it. If not for drinking, at least utilize it for bathing, for cooking, or whatever. Okay, and they do in some areas.
First world countries need to step up and be the leaders to help nations with minimal water access find a way to provide their citizens with drinkable water. Mrs. Koufos and the people of Greece are working to fund programs to bring desalination units to third world countries, like Ethiopia. An estimated 53 gallons of water are filtered and made potable daily, with an increase of creation on each island. Greece is making strides to try and help bring water access to the rest of the world. The whole world needs to work together to fund these programs for underdeveloped countries. It is because of the economic state of developing third world countries that nations like Ethiopia don't have water access that the citizens need. But why should these other nations care about the problems of these third world countries? These issues don't affect us here in the US, right? Most people in the United States are used to having water access straight from their faucets. However, not everyone here has that same water access. In our very own country, there are many struggling to get water. The indigenous people of North America are those who originally lived on the continent, long before European discovery. Indigenous cultures are one of the most beautiful cultures that find a great connection to the land around them. But as colonization continued, the indigenous people were pushed out of their native land, bullied into submission, and shoved into reservations. An estimated 48% of Native American households are barren of water. The lack of clean water is leading to increased spreads of disease like COVID-19, which spreads 3.3 times faster on reservations than in white households. America has had this troubling history of cutting off its native population from their sacred lands that were promised in treaties and agreements. The US has left its native population on run-down reservations that don't allow the natives to be able to fully explore their connection to the land. The horrors of what happens on reservations is often overlooked by the rest of the country, but these conditions are inhumane and disgusting. Indigenous reservations rarely have running water, and those who do don't have clean water. How is it that here in America, one of the richest countries in the world, there are people without access to clean water? We have lived in the sphere of privilege, but to pop this bubble, we turn to Autumn Montague, an attorney who's been practicing land use and water law on behalf of Native Americans for the last decade. She has experience in state-based adjudication cases as well as monitoring drought, serving as a water rights hearing examiner, acting as a state spokesperson in a water rights compact, representing school trust lands, and gaining experience in federal court. She's also involved in various forestry-related cases.
Indian country, it's 19% more likely that you'll find that to be the case. A lot of times tribes are trucking water in, they're using bottled water just for daily use, and this is a huge issue, not just for day-to-day living, but in terms of having a sustainable nation. And that second part, that leads to the second part to answering your question, which is that fighting for water is fighting for the sovereign ability to have a homeland. That homeland was often promised in treaties by the United States. And so these fights they go to the very core. We'll be passing a Water Settlement Act through Congress. And as you can imagine, doing that is a Herculean effort. So they've been at it since the 1970s. And we just finally got a hearing before the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs this past fall. So their bill finally got introduced and it finally got a hearing. And just a month ago, it got passed out of committee favorably. So now it goes from the Senate. Well, hopefully the Senate will pass it. Then it goes to the House. And then, if it passes both houses, of course, it goes to the president. If that bill gets signed, then significant funding will come to the tribe to build the infrastructure that's needed. So that will include building a reservoir. So it's huge infrastructure that requires a ton of planning, a ton of money. And basically that's the roadblock often is money and infrastructure, hot and dry. And so elders were being provided places to go to cool themselves in the really hot times, because the primary way of cooling is through these things called swamp coolers, which require water to run.
The lack of water has also led to reservations relying on sugary drinks for hydration because they're so much cheaper and safer than the water sources they have. But this leads to the native population having a spike in diabetes across the US. There are places in America, not just on reservations, that haven't had access to water. Chemical spills have led to areas not being able to use their water because of contamination and disease. The droughts in the US make it so that the population has to limit their water usage. But even this conservation of water during drought isn't as extreme as how reservations and underdeveloped nations of the world live. America is a rather privileged part of the world because it's a first world country and already developed. The average citizen of the United States would think that there is no need to worry about water access. But the sad truth is that even here in the US, there's still inequality and systemic struggles for water access. Water is a vital and necessary part of life for all humans and creatures across the globe. But the world is nearing a great conflict. The Earth's natural resources are being mistreated by humans, which leads to its dwindling supply. The nations of the world have to fight over water access to see whose citizens get to keep their water privileges. As water becomes contaminated and less accessible across the world, the tension over its use becomes more extreme and intense. The water in our veins hydrates and purifies the soul, but the world is coming into an era of drought and unprecedented weather patterns. There will come a day soon where water access will be one of the world's foremost struggles. We need to prepare so that the fight for water doesn't turn irreversible, like how humanity has dealt with other problems, like pollution. This is water, the very thing that composes us and keeps us alive. We need to start now. Humankind has been put through a great struggle. We've exploited nature and spent our life taking resources for granted. There are ways to help those who have been deprived of a basic right for far too long. We need to help one another. We have lived our whole lives having access to water. But what about the rest of the world? They're humans just like us, and they need water too. Fight for the change that needs made. Educate, advocate, and help. Fight for water accessibility.